It's about an hour before sunrise, roughly 1200 BC, and you're on a roof. Not because anything has gone wrong, but simply because that's where you sleep. It's the coolest surface in the house is made of mud, and the mud has been holding yesterday's heat like a grudge since about 2 in the afternoon. There's a wooden headrest under your neck which sounds medieval but is genuinely more comfortable than it looks, and below you there's a village of maybe 68 houses pressed against a desert hillside in western Thebes. You are not a pharaoh. You are almost certainly not a priest. Statistically, you are a farmer. And if you're not a farmer, you're the guy who carves the inside of the pharaoh's tomb, and you have to be at work in about 90 minutes. So what do you do all day? Here's the strange thing. We know an enormous amount about ancient Egypt. We know what they thought happened to your heart after you died. We know the names of their gods, the layout of their temples, the recipe for embalming fluid, the precise weight of the feather your soul got measured against. 3,000 years of continuous civilization, and we have the paperwork. And yet almost nobody can tell you what an Egyptian did on a Tuesday. That's the story today. Not the tombs, not the gold. The Tuesday, breakfast, the commute, the arguing with your boss, the reason your teeth were destroyed by the age of 30, the world's first recorded labor strike, and a 4,500-year-old logbook written by a middle manager named Merer, who was, in the most literal sense, building the Great Pyramid and complaining about the boat schedule. Let's go. The thing nobody tells you about Egypt. Here's the premise, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Everything you picture when you hear the words ancient Egypt is a tomb, a temple, or something that came out of a tomb or a temple. The mask, the sarcophagus, the pyramids, the Valley of the Kings, the wall paintings, the mummies. All of it. Every image in your head is from the death industry. And that makes Egypt look like a civilization of morbid weirdos who spent 3 millennia obsessed with the afterlife and did essentially nothing else, which is the conclusion basically every European visitor came to for about 400 years. But there's a reason the record looks like that, and the reason is embarrassingly simple. Tombs and temples were built out of stone because they were meant to last forever. Everything else, the houses, the workshops, the markets, the granaries, the entire physical fabric of ordinary life was built out of sun-dried mud brick. Mud brick does not last forever. Mud brick lasts about a generation before it needs patching, and once it's abandoned, it goes back to being dirt. Add the annual flood, which was very good at growing wheat and very bad at preserving architecture, and you get a filing error that has shaped how the entire planet imagines Egypt. We didn't find a death cult. We found the only part that survived. So the question becomes, can we actually reconstruct the ordinary day? And the answer, weirdly, is yes. Better than for almost any other ancient society. Because of one village, one dry hillside, and a few thousand pieces of broken pottery that somebody used as scrap paper. First, the river, because the river is the clock. Before we get to the day, you need the year. Because in Egypt, the year controlled the day in a way that's hard for us to imagine. The Nile flooded. Every summer, meltwater and monsoon rain from the Ethiopian highlands came down the river and put the entire floodplain underwater, and then withdrew and left behind a layer of black silt, so fertile that the Egyptians named their country after it, Kemet, the Black Land, as opposed to Deshret, the Red Land, which is the desert, which is where you go to die or to bury people. And those are the two options. The Egyptians didn't split the year into 4 seasons. They split it into 3, and every one of them is a job description. Akhet, the inundation, roughly July to October. The fields are underwater. You cannot farm. You are, for about 4 months, unemployed. Pare, the emergence, October to February. The water pulls back, the mud is soft, you plow, and you sow. Shemu, the harvest. February to June. You cut, you thresh, you carry, and the tax assessor arrives with a rope and a bad attitude. Now, hold on to Akhet, because that 4-month gap where the entire agricultural workforce of the richest kingdom on earth has nothing to do is going to become extremely relevant when we talk about who built the pyramids. One more thing about time. The Egyptians had hours. They did not have hours the way you have hours. They divided daylight into 12 parts and the night into 12 parts, always, no matter the season. Which means a summer hour was noticeably longer than a winter hour. Your hour stretched and shrank with the sun. They tracked it with shadow sticks and, later, water clocks, which are pots with a hole in the bottom that drain at a known rate. Nobody was late in the modern sense. Nobody could be. There was no unit small enough to be late by. The morning. You get up before the sun because the sun is the whole point. Egyptian houses had small high windows and no glass, and the heat by mid-afternoon was brutal, so work started at first light and the serious stuff was done before noon. There's a lovely, very human detail in this. In the workmen's village of Deir el Medina, the houses have a front room with a built-in enclosed bed-shaped structure, often decorated with images of Bes, the dwarf god with the lion face who guarded households, and Taweret, the pregnant hippo goddess of childbirth. Egyptologists still argue about exactly what that box was for. Birth, ancestor worship, some combination. But it's the first thing in the house, right by the door, which tells you something about priorities. Breakfast is bread and beer, not bread and also beer. Bread and beer as a functional single food system. Egyptian beer was thick, low in alcohol, made from barley and emmer wheat, and closer to a soupy porridge than to anything you'd order on a Friday. It was calories. It was safe liquid. Children drank it. Workers were paid in it. State rations at Deir el Medina were issued in loaves and jars, and a standard daily allotment for a workman ran to several loaves and a couple of jugs. And the bread is where it gets grim. Egyptian bread was full of sand. Some of it blew in, some of it came off the grinding stones, and it wore human teeth down like sandpaper. Go and look at Egyptian mummies, royalty included, and the dental wear is catastrophic. Molars ground flat to the pulp, abscesses in the jawbone big enough to see across a room. Ramesses II, the most powerful man in the known world, master of an empire, builder of Abu Simbel, died with an infected mouth that would have been in more or less constant pain. All the gold in the Nile Valley and nobody could do anything about a toothache. Let that sit for a second. Then it depends entirely on who you are. Here's where the day splits, because an Egyptian is not one person. If you're a farmer, and roughly 9 out of 10 of you are, your day is water and mud. You're hauling buckets, maintaining irrigation channels, hand-lifting water with a shaduf, a counterweighted pole with a bucket on one end that is such a good piece of engineering that you can still find them in use along the Nile today. You're sowing by walking backwards, scattering seed, while somebody drives animals over the field behind you to trample it in. During harvest, you're bent double with a sickle for the whole of daylight. And then the scribes show up. There is a wall painting in the tomb of Mena, an estate inspector from the 18th dynasty that shows the whole process. Surveyors measuring a field with a knotted rope to calculate the tax owed, and elsewhere in the same tomb, a farmer being beaten. It's not subtle. The Egyptians painted the beating right there on the wall next to the wheat because from the perspective of the person commissioning the tomb, that was simply what a well-run estate looked like. If you're a workman at Deir el Medina, you have possibly the strangest job in the ancient world. You live in a walled village in the desert on the West Bank at Thebes, and your job, and your father's job, and your son's job is to carve and paint the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. You are a specialist. You are literate, or at least some of your neighbors are. You are paid by the state in grain, fish, vegetables, oil, and beer, and your week is 10 days long. Egyptians ran a 10-day week, and the crew worked 8 of those days and had 2 off. During the 8-day stretch, you didn't commute because the walk over the hill was long and hot, so you slept in a cluster of stone huts on the col above the valley, and only came home for the weekend. 8 on, 2 off in the Bronze Age. Your ancestors invented the concept of the weekend and then made it slightly worse. If you're a scribe, congratulations. You have won. Literacy in Egypt was probably somewhere around 1% of the population and possibly lower, and it was the one reliable escalator out of physical labor. And the Egyptians knew it, and they were extremely unsubtle about it. There's a Middle Kingdom text called the Instruction of Dua Keti, sometimes known as the Satire of the Trades. And it is essentially a father dragging every profession in Egypt in order to convince his son to go to scribal school. The potter is filthier than a pig, digging in mud. The metalworker's fingers are like crocodile hide. The barber wanders the streets exhausted looking for chins. The fisherman works among crocodiles, which is not a metaphor. That's just the job. The washerman cleans other people's clothes on a riverbank next to those same crocodiles. And the punchline, over and over, be a scribe. Because a scribe is not beaten, and a scribe gives the orders. Some career advice is eternal. If you're a woman, your day starts earlier, and the grinding is what will get you. Turning emmer into flour meant kneeling, and pushing a stone back and forth over a saddle quern for hours. Skeletons of Egyptian women show the damage in exactly the places you'd predict: worn knees, damaged toes, arthritis in the lower back, deformation of the big toe joint from kneeling and pushing. You can identify the labor from the bones. But here's the part that surprises people. Egyptian women had legal standing that would have been unthinkable in classical Athens or Rome. They could own property in their own name. They could inherit it and leave it to whoever they wanted. They could enter contracts, initiate divorce, appear in court as witnesses and as litigants. We have the documents. There are surviving records from Deir el-Medina of women buying, selling, lending, and suing, legally freer than a Greek woman 1,000 years later, and doing it with a spine slowly being destroyed by a rock. The middle of the day. Midday you stop because you have to. There's a break, there's food, there's shade. The main meal was usually later, in the evening, and the food itself was better than you'd think. Bread, obviously. Beer, onions, garlic, leeks, lettuce, cucumbers, lentils, chickpeas, dates, figs, grapes, pomegranates, fish from the river, dried and salted. Meat if you were wealthy or if there was a festival, which there constantly was. And then there's the grooming, which is a whole thing. Egyptians were, by the standards of every civilization around them, obsessive about being clean, bathing daily where water allowed, body hair removed with razors and tweezers on men and women both. Priests shaved their entire bodies, including eyebrows, and washed multiple times a day. Herodotus, visiting centuries later, wrote about Egyptian cleanliness like a man describing an alien species. And the eyeliner was not just for looks. That black coal was mostly galena, a lead ore, and Egyptians of every class wore it. The standard explanation has always been sun glare, like the black smear under an athlete's eyes. But a 2010 study out of the Louvre analyzing residues from ancient coal containers found lead salts in the mixtures that don't occur naturally and appear to have been deliberately synthesized, and the researchers argued those compounds could trigger a low-level immune response in the skin around the eye, potentially helping against the eye infections that were rampant along a river full of standing water and flies. The reading isn't settled, and you should hold it loosely. But there's a real possibility that the most famous cosmetic in human history was also, accidentally or otherwise, medicine. Now here's where it gets good. Everything I've told you so far is reconstruction. Wall paintings, grave goods, skeletons, formal texts written by elites for elites. But Deir el-Medina gave us something else, and it is one of the great flukes of archaeology. The workmen there wrote constantly, and papyrus was expensive, so for anything routine they used ostraca, broken pottery shards and flat flakes of limestone, scrap paper, and they threw them in a pit, and the pit was in a desert so nothing rotted. And we have found thousands of them. These are not monuments. These are notes, laundry lists, I owe us, love poems, complaints, sketches, a schoolboy's writing practice, somebody's inventory of donkeys, and among them is a document that I think about more than almost anything else from the ancient world. An attendance register, a crew roster listing workmen by name day by day with the reason each man was absent. The reasons are these: ill, eye trouble, stung by a scorpion, brewing beer, building his house, wrapping his dead mother. His daughter was bleeding, meaning she'd started menstruating and he stayed home, attending a festival, making offerings to his god, with his boss, and in more than one instance, entries that scholars read as a man being off because he'd been drinking the night before, which is a hangover, recorded in ink in a state personnel file 3,200 years ago. These are named individuals, not a workman. Pendua, Seba, Apeti, men who called in sick and had it written down and are now, 4,000 years later, permanently on record as having missed a Tuesday. And then it goes further. In the 29th year of the reign of Rameses III, around 1157 BC, the grain rations for Deir el-Medina were late, repeatedly. So the crews walked off the job. They downed tools, marched out of the valley, and staged a sit-in behind the mortuary temple of Thutmose III, refusing to move until they were paid. We know this because the village scribe, a man named Amennacht, wrote the whole thing down on what is now called the Turin Strike Papyrus. Their own words are in there. They said, "We are hungry. 18 days of the month have passed." They sent for officials. The officials made excuses. The workers went back the next day, and did it again. It is the first documented labor strike in recorded human history, and it was carried out by the men building the tomb of the God King against the God King's administration over late pay. And the last piece. In 2013, a French team working at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast found the oldest inscribed papyri ever discovered, dating to around the 26th year of the reign of Khufu, roughly 2560 BC. Among them is a logbook kept by an inspector named Merer, who led a team of about 40 men. Merer's job was hauling limestone. He and his crew sailed from the quarries at Tura across to Giza, loaded blocks, delivered them, and turned around and did it again. And the round trip took a few days, and he logged every single one. Where they went, what they carried, who they reported to, which was a man named Ankayef, the king's half-brother, running the operation. We have a shift log from the construction of the Great Pyramid, written by the guy on the boat. Let's take a step back. Okay, put it all together, because I think there are three things here and they build on each other. First, the working population of Egypt was not enslaved. This is where Akhet comes back. For 4 months a year, the fields were underwater and the entire agricultural labor force was idle, and the state fed them, housed them, and put them to work moving stone. The workers' town excavated at Giza has bakeries, breweries, and enormous quantities of cattle bone, meaning these people were eating beef. The cemetery next to it holds workers buried with care, and their skeletons show healed fractures, meaning somebody set the bones and somebody fed them while they mended. That is not what a slave camp looks like. It looks like a state project with a canteen and an infirmary. Second, the ancient Egyptian day was, in its texture, aggressively ordinary. Wake up, eat bread, go to work, complain about work, deal with your family, eat again, play a board game, go to sleep on the roof. The Senate boards found in tombs are the same Senate boards found in houses. People played games. People wrote love poetry. And some of it is very good. And quite a lot of it is about being unable to sleep because of someone. Third, and this is the one, we got Egypt backwards for 400 years for a reason that has nothing to do with Egypt. The stones survived. The mud didn't. We inherited a civilization's funeral wing and mistook it for the whole building. And it took a rubbish pit full of broken pottery in a workman's village to give us back the parts that were made of ordinary life, which is to say the parts that were actually most of it. The pyramids weren't the point. The pyramids were what was left. Here's what I keep coming back to. Somewhere around 1157 BC, a man walked out of the Valley of the Kings, in the heat because his pay was late. He was hungry and he was angry and he had a family, and he sat down in the shade of a dead pharaoh's temple with his co-workers and refused to move. And a scribe named Amenecht, who probably wished he was somewhere else, wrote it down. That man's name did not go on a monument. He did not get a statue. He got a line in an administrative document on a material nobody expected to last, filed by a bureaucrat doing his job. And it lasted. It outlasted the empire, the language, the gods, and the entire idea of Egypt. It's in a museum in Turin. 3,000 years from now, most of what you built today will be gone. The buildings, the accounts, the photographs, all of it. What survives, if anything survives, will probably be something you thought was disposable. A note, a complaint, a record of the day you didn't come in. So tonight when you go to bed, you're doing what a person on a mud roof in Western Thebes did, with a wooden block under his neck, listening to the wind come off the desert, thinking about the 8 days of work in front of him and the 2 days at the end of it. Same sun, same tiredness, same weekend. He just had to wait 10 days for it. So, question for you. 10-day week, 8 days on, 2 days off, paid entirely in bread and beer. Would you take that deal? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so we can keep exploring the hidden corners of ancient Egypt together. Until then, see you soon.